Lead from the Side is made in partnership with Performance Leadership, a co-venture of Western Bulldogs and Victoria University. Hi, I'm Spencer Kassimir, and this is Lead from the Side. Today's guest is Helen Wood Grant, the first female board member of Men of League, now known as Family of League, where she is now the chair of the organization. She's had quite a career in sport and beyond, and today we'll be speaking about the leadership skills she brings to the table and talk about how she has gone not just from role to role in leadership, but which skills were transferable and which ones weren't. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Spencer.
First things first, before we start, I was very happy to see that we are both alumni of a certain organization. I saw that you also did AFS.
Indeed, yes. When I was 16, I was sent to Detroit, Michigan for a year to live with a family there for the year and go to school.
It's a very small world. I was not in Detroit. I was in New York, but as a 16-year-old, I was sent over to Japan and am still very, very close with my host family. I found that for me, AFS gave the opportunity to experience different cultures and almost have a sense of leadership, but also a sense of learning from others. And I was curious, what was your experience?
Well, remarkable. And like you, those connections remain to this day. I was dying to do something wild and different and dangerous and brave. And the opportunity to apply for the American Field Service Scholarship, which is unlike others. It is not a situation where you go away and then stay with a family and then you have that family's child come back and stay with you. It's a genuine scholarship where you go for a year, you attend school and you represent your country in a foreign country by speaking to all kinds of community organisations. Was invited with about 6 other AFSs from all over the country to address the Senate in Washington. So that was quite something. I'm sure the senators were bored to sobs, but they were terribly kind to us all. And everyone was fascinated with Australia then as now. I adored my school there for that year, came back in August of grade 12 and then sat for the HSC on the 30th of October that year. So I didn't lose time, which I was very well supported by my school, and returned and was a brand new university student. So, yeah, they were great times.
And I'm glad you gave the explanation of AFS because they do so much more than just a student exchange. It really teaches fantastic leadership. But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about Family of League. It was Men of League since its inception in 2002, and it's gone through changes recently. What's it like, that transition to Family of League? Because change is always hard.
The change is very hard, and it's near impossible for some. And that's always the push-pull of leadership decisions around change, especially in an organisation such as Men of League, now Family of League, which is heavily skewed to a volunteer contribution because they have a very, very strong emotional attachment to the game of rugby league and to the understanding that there is a huge amount of need in the rugby league community. You're really looking at communities who revolve around sport and particularly rugby league, and also communities that are often in various stages of disadvantage. So, yeah, first you have to lead with respect and you have to ask questions because just the notion that there should be change is just the beginning of the conversation.
Most people also didn't realize, and I didn't realize when I first came out here, that it's focused on people who were not necessarily in the NRL, that it was actually focused towards the community level.
Yeah, very much grassroots. It was created by a bunch of first grade players who were mates and their friends in order to support other mates who were in strife of some kind. It was a very different society. It was a very different game. And you can see that written all over that first remarkable 10 years where it really went from, a group of friends to something organised and functional and doing extraordinary work in the community. By the time we got to the 20th year, that being last year, of course, we as an organisation found it harder and harder to get cut through to help people understand who we are here to support. The decision was made that we would, with deep respect and great thanks, build on Men of League transition to Family of League, thus expanding the initial notion of men to include the people that those very men had worked for and sought to include over time. And that's really just part of the story. There's also obviously cultural backgrounds that we would like to celebrate and who make such a great contribution to our game.
And it's interesting reflecting on what you said also in context of the 20 years, let's just say, prior to the foundation of that, because true professionalism really didn't start arguably until the mid-90s, certainly not until the Super League War. It feels like there's a two-step process between those early years of professionalism and then subsequently what we've done since. And I'd love to know your thoughts on it.
I think a great kind of comparison is to see what we're seeing at the moment, which is the men's game, which is fully professional, has been, as you say, for some time, and the women's game, which in ever greater ways being given a playing platform that equates to the guys. And now we're seeing, of course, this coming weekend, the first week of a further evolution in the women's game. So I think what we're just seeing here as the charity of the sport is that you can never be too far behind the notions and the values and the belief systems of the game that defines everybody who you help. And of course, you know, we care financially, socially, and emotionally. It's not just money, but we help every single person socially and emotionally who can demonstrate having made a contribution to the game. And there are so many ways in which communities support this game. You know, it's largely through people in a time-poor life choosing to give time to this game in their community with, you know, lines drawn at games early in the morning, with sausages sizzling for after the game, with social events going on, all of which bind community.
If you're looking to level up your ability to lead and inspire others, then Performance Leadership is the course for you. Performance Leadership is a unique and exciting professional development course delivered in partnership with Western Bulldogs and Victoria University. The 2-day course focuses on practical learning with a range of facilitated activities. Learning is complemented by high-performance sport insights from a range of Western Bulldogs guest speakers and senior industry leaders. Join like-minded professionals at Performance Leadership in Melbourne this October. To find out more, visit education.westernbulldogs.com.au. For me personally, it's great because not just my son, but my daughter also plays rugby league. The NRL has taken a very different approach from the AFL in growing the women's game. The NRL has taken a more step-by-step process. Would love to know your thoughts. Is there a right answer and a wrong answer?
Look, I don't think there's a right answer because only the people around the commission table really understand. They have unbelievable metrics. They have incredible research. So I wouldn't presume to know what that detail is. I know one of the key concerns was player welfare and was to see that the women have the right support around training, fitness and recovery. I don't think COVID did us any favours. Of course, that placed a lot of pressure on containment and support rather than expansion. So I would imagine as a businesswoman that all of those things were considered. I'm desperate to see State of Origin become 3 games. And I know the women I know who are playing currently are impatient, as they should be, for more of everything. And I'm delighted about that because that's exactly what their attitude should be. There's a pretty sensible balance of fighting hard to see that they catch up and understanding that some things for their own benefit probably need to happen at a slightly, ever so slightly slower pace than they'd like.
You know, putting on my historian cap for a moment, the idea of men even getting paid is the reason for rugby league existing. And we've seen, in many ways, an accelerated renaissance of women playing rugby league, even though it's clearly not at the same pay grade as the men's. And we can discuss all the reasons for that from an economics point of view. But it's taken certainly less than 100 years.
But what I think so remarkable and compelling, and exactly what I thought in my own mind would happen, is that it has struck such a chord, and particularly the uptake in young women in the game has been extraordinary. And I think the acceptance of young boys, of young girls. I mean, one of the most touching things I've seen at a rugby league field was some years ago at the World Cup here in Australia, kids were lining up to get autographs from the female Australian players, and about half the people lining up were little boys. And I thought, God, it's a brave new world. It's great in so many ways that are bigger than the game. And that's what I love about sport, is it allows people to express all kinds of really intense emotions in a socially acceptable way. It allows for communities to find a point at which they bond and bind. And it's spectacular. Rugby league is spectacular entertainment. And the old saying, if we're stronger together, I think really speaks loudly.
The concept of leadership through volunteering is a very interesting one. I was hoping to get your ideas on the qualities of leadership that you look for in people in that volunteer role.
Yeah, very interesting, because I wonder if it is really that different from what I look for and how I chose to develop myself as a leader, because I think there are some personality types that simply are people who lead sometimes from the middle. I think the notion of serving, which is what volunteering is based on, is not generally associated with leading. I believe it's critical to a good leader. So I'm a volunteer. I am not paid, nor is any board member paid. The only people paid in our organisation are our small and hardworking executive. So serving to me is a hugely powerful role. And it usually means that person has made some kind of moral or values-based judgment about how to spend their time. It doesn't have to be for, a charitable organisation such as ours. It could be helping a neighbour. It's all the small kindnesses. And I believe strongly in the web and network that small kindnesses create. In relation to leadership, I think the old-fashioned notion of leading by example still counts. And that was how, in my family, my parents, who were not leaders in business, but leaders in their community. So I grew up with that model. I didn't know that's not what you did. I loved being in the middle of all of that positive energy. And that's what it feels like to me. And all the psychology now is really, all the research is now showing that that is one of the cornerstones of strong and positive mental health. And I think this role as chair of the foundation is a really wonderful one for me, because it brings together all of the things that I have spent my life doing. It's a rare thing and something to be deeply grateful for, to feel as though every single asset you have is being deployed.
No, that's well said. It's actually a really good way for us to pivot as well into the next topic. What are the most notable differences between how you felt you were to lead, or how you used to lead, and how you do it now?
Well, I don't know that it really has that much, but I think the world around me's changed, and that has allowed me to do things slightly differently. So as a very young woman of 23, I was managing the fashion advertising business for Myer in New South Wales. And that was a really big role, with a lot of need for liaison, both with the buyers, with the suppliers, and then, of course, with your own creative team. So there are a lot of pieces of that puzzle, all of them wildly older than me. The nearest person was double my age. I had to learn to speak my mind, but I also had to temper that with making sure that I communicated, that I respected them. So I had to really amp up my listening skills and do this sort of, one mouth, two ears thing, listen twice as much as you talk, which, wasn't always easy, but was great discipline to force yourself when you felt you knew the answer and you could cut the conversation by about 25 minutes, to instead allow every single person to speak and then speak last. And that's become now something I just do, but it was learned, and a good thing too. Then as I moved along my management career, what I believe is that those small things, always listen. Never believe you're the smartest person in the room, even if people tell you you are. Have a laugh. Life should be joyful. Business should be joyful. If you can find a moment to ask after someone's personal life, for example, and just develop connections that are greater than the outcome of the business project you're working on. it was really natural for me, but I've really developed over time. But the biggest change, without question, is women being much more accepted in senior roles, genuinely respected in any kind of meeting or decision-making process. And when I look at my life and going from, my university sort of activism around women's rights to now be still happily contributing to the business world, as well as obviously my hugely valued private life, I see the hugest change is that I've been allowed to be more of myself and to cut to the chase more and to be seen to be a significant person in a business conversation, not because I necessarily was 1,000 times better, sort of over the time, but because the world around me permitted me and 1,000 million people like me to be heard.
It goes back to our initial discussion about how sometimes you just had to be there to understand that progression.
The other thing, of course, is in all of that is the ability to enable and prosper others. All of these wonderful young men and women who are just bristling to go and buzzing with ideas. It is absolutely a true and deep pleasure for me to work with them and to encourage them and to watch them thrive. That's the joy of all of this.
Is there a difference between leading in different industries that you've experienced? For, let's just say, we'll start with Myer and we'll talk about rugby league now. What have you experienced?
Yeah, well, I think the corporate life I had was with very, very, very large entities. And that's a very particular kind of structural business experience. It's quite hierarchical. It offers you a wonderfully deep and broad platform. It was fabulous for me. I loved every minute of every single thing I did. So, they were very, very different industries, but they all were off this significant corporate base. When I established my own business about 30 years ago, it was a totally different animal. The one thing that I underestimated was how adrift I felt without this huge corporate behemoth. And I don't think I realised how much that organisation, for the person I was speaking with, defined me. So it took me probably about 12 months to really, hone my sales skills. I'd been spoken for by the name on my business card. In order to grow my business, which I wanted to do, I had to go out and explain myself and advocate for myself. Yeah, I really learned an awful lot from running my own business all of this time. And of course, my clients taught me enormously.
I'd be curious to know, when somebody asks you, what's your biggest innovation that you're proud of in leadership, or what's the biggest moment in leadership that you feel was a defining moment for you in your career? What was that?
It'd be a bit of a dead heat between establishing my own business in the way that I did. At that time, I had also moved states and was contemplating having a child, which I had not contemplated before. So there are a lot of things going on. And don't forget, we as leaders, we exist like everybody else, don't we, in the real world with all its pressures and all of its claims on us. So I rate that as a great personal and professional success. And I think the other thing that comes incredibly close to it is this organisational transition from men of league to family of league in order to future-proof it, that we are positioned to be able to talk about what we do without having to preface it with a half an hour discussion about what we really are. A certain view is that is exactly what we are doing. It is painful as people's personal identities are wrapped up in an organisation such as ours. It's a very complicated piece of cultural change, and it will take a couple of years, I believe, for the fullness of the benefit to be truly apparent. And we need, in the meantime, to continue to assist others in understanding that while we have changed our name and that while we therefore are planning for today and tomorrow, the heart and soul has not changed at all.
You took the wind out of my sails, though, because the final question was going to be leading through tough times and overcoming hurdles. But I do have a pop quiz extra question, though, as always.
Okie dokes.
If there were a piece of leadership skills that you currently use now that you've learned recently, that you wish you knew earlier on, what would it be?
I think when you're someone who at 15 decided they were going to go and live across the other side of the world without anything they ever knew. I think you're obviously a person who's really up for change, who's up for a bit of disruption. And I think for a lot of my career, I genuinely thought everyone was like that. Oh, everyone gets up every day wanting to find, a better mousetrap. Let's do that faster, or let's do that on a bigger scale, or, and truly, honestly, I don't think I would have been more successful necessarily, but I did learn in, let's just say, the last third of the years I've had in business that people are deeply discomforted by disruption and by better ways of doing things, which is so fantastic because we need the people who actually don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need that. We need all these different personality types with all these different biases and all these different ways of looking at the world. All of it has its place. And I think when I started to realize that when I was starting a lot of these conversations with teams, while the response to me was positive and, oh, yeah, let's do this, what I saw was a real lag in behaviour that I started to realise that maybe I needed to just slow things down a little bit and maybe not always be pushing for better and more and other. I think that's the thing.
On that note, Helen, let's not leave it too long to catch up again. It has been such a pleasure having you on. Again, hope you take the time to go to familyofleague.org.au to see the great work that they're doing. That's familyofleague.org.au, and you already know the rest. Take care. Thanks for listening today, and thanks to our sponsors. More information about the show and our guests can be found in the show notes. You can follow the show on Twitter or LinkedIn at Lead From The Side, or myself on Twitter or LinkedIn at BallsOutPhD. If you want to contribute to the show, send us an email at leadfromtheside@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. See you next time, and remember to lead from the side.